that we've all had to deal with over this last 18 months. But I especially think that students, you're having to find your inner resolve on this one, because I can't really imagine how university would have been in a virtual setting. So well done. This is creating something of resilience within yourselves, and things will get better. We are sort of on the way out of this, hopefully. Yeah, it's going to get better. Just hang on in there. Okay. So I wanted to talk about geoscience and the purpose of geoscience, and where do we navigate our subject in the energy transition. So I'll provide some reflections on that. But first I wanted to talk a bit about my background and a bit about where I come from and how I got to where I am. So as was said, my name is Mary Goodlad, and I currently head up the offshore wind area development within the Baltic Sea for Equinor. But I grew up on the Shetland Islands, which is an archipelago at the very north of Scotland. So it's as far north as you can go in the UK. And it was a really fantastic upbringing. You're surrounded by nature. And in many ways that influenced my topic that I chose to study, which was, of course, geology. The other thing that really influenced me was the presence of industry within Shetland. And we had three main industries. We had the aquaculture industry, and my mum and dad were fish farmers, salmon fish farmers. We had the fishing industry, and we had the oil and gas industry. And having these big three industrial regions or sectors within our island was a big influence. And it was a big influence in sort of the main way for me was that I saw firsthand when industry was done well, and when industry was done with its community that hosted it in mind, how much industry benefited the island and the communities that hosted it. So I saw firsthand how much my islands, Shetland, benefited from these three main industries. And I thought to myself, I want a piece of that. I want to be in industry. And for me, the natural choice, I guess, was to go and study geology, because I had, always been passionate about the Earth and the planet and its processes. And I wanted to explore how I could get into industry through the subject of geology. And so it was, I guess it was with that sort of thread that I went away to do my studies. I did a chemistry and geology undergrad at Glasgow University. And then I went on to do my petroleum geoscience at Imperial. And I'd always been someone that was very committed to sort of environmental projects and protection of our planet. And I kind of had this dilemma, do I enter into the petroleum industry or do I do something else? And for me, I remember having a lot of conversations with my dad about this one. He's a big influence in my life. And his point was, you can make so much more of a change within the right kind of company from the inside to the energy transition and to the way that we're going to fuel our planet. You can do that so much more effectively from the inside of a company who's doing things in the right way, as opposed to campaigning from the outside, for example. So it was with that I really only had one company in mind that I wanted to join, and it was Statoil at the time. Obviously, we're called Equinor now. And I worked really hard to secure a place there at Statoil. And I went off to work on the Mariner heavy oil field within Scotland. And I'm very proud of my time working in the oil and gas side of the business. At our core, Equinor is a company whose mission purpose is to benefit society and the progress of people by finding and harnessing natural resources. And those resources are
Sorry,
oil and gas.
Very sorry for interrupting you. Could you please, I don't know if it's possible to put in the presentation mode.
Yeah. Can you not see the slides?
Yeah, we can see it, but sometimes the lower part of the slides sometimes is cut.
Not full screen. You need to put full screen.
Yeah, I wanted to be able to access some notes at the same time, so
yeah,
I think I'll just leave it.
Yeah, maybe
Unless
it works, but if you can do it, we can do it in this way as well.
You can remove the upper part of your PPT at least.
Pardon?
Remove the upper part of your PPT. Double click on home of file.
Can you not see my screen, no?
Yeah, we see it. We see it. It's just because it's not in the presentation mode. When you, for example, when you click F5 in your keyboard.
I want to be able to access my notes at the same time.
Okay,
so
no problem, no problem. I think you can. We can.
I will try. And
yeah. Now that's way better.
Yeah, but I have no notes now. So.
Okay, so no problem. Do how you want to do.
Let me see if this works. If I'm able to. How does that? No, I'm going to leave it the way it was.
Yeah, you can click the escape.
Okay, I can't get out of this now.
Yeah, you can click escape button.
Escape.
ESC.
You should have just kept it the way it was.
Yeah, left corner.
In the upper left. Yeah.
Okay, I'll share again. Okay, you can see the slide?
Yes.
Yeah, yes. Yeah,
okay, so where was I?
You can keep going. Sorry.
Where was I? I was talking about sort of Equinor's purpose, I think. So I was very proud of the time that I spent on Mariner and on the sort of the oil and gas part of the of Equinor's business. And I got the opportunity to transition into the renewables side. And I spent a large part of my time within renewables, within the operations part of the business. And, you know, it was fantastic to have this opportunity to really be at the sharp end of the business, to understand how we actually efficiently and safely keep these turbines spinning and how we make a renewable business out of this. So that's a bit of history about me and about how I got to where I got to. But I want to talk a bit now about geology and about the purpose of geology within the energy transition. And I'm going to start to reflect about different industries that have gone before and about where geology finds its role now in this very different setting for the future of our subject. So what I like to do is I like to draw parallels from previous industry and thinking about sort of the history that's gone before. And I think that the one that I want to use today is the development of space, right? And the three sort of C's that go with that: competition, collaboration, and commercialization. So the space race, if we start over at the left-hand side, the space race was this 20th century competition actually between two Cold War rivals, the Soviet Union and the United States. And it was really born out of sort of the ballistic missile-based nuclear race between the two nations of World War II. Then it moved into the collaboration sphere, and in the early 1990s, it moved into that phase of where political and funding realities actually shifted the balance towards collaboration. For example, the International Space Station with 16 nations as its partner. And then the final C is that era of space that we're moving into now, where we see Elon Musk and Richard Branson, flirting with this idea that the outdoor atmosphere is something that we can all enjoy. And so when I look at the new energy sector, we're very much in that first C, in this competition phase for offshore wind, for carbon capture, for all the different types of technology that are going to be in the energy transition. And competition is fierce, and it's going to get fiercer. You'll have seen in the last couple of months, maybe, that BP paid a huge amount of money to access the shallow seabed lease between Ireland for some the round 4 offshore wind licenses. And that level of competition is good. It keeps industry fit, it keeps us on our toes, drives innovation, etc. But my point is that we don't actually have time to spend decades in that competition mode. The energy transition is going to have to be cross-sector, cross-scientific, private, public, etc. Collaboration on a level that's never been seen before. And if geologists are going to step up within that space, within that collaboration mode, we need to be really explicit on our purpose. What's the purpose of our science? And it gets me thinking, every main science, when I think about the three, physics, chemistry, biology, they all have this galvanizing factor. They have a mission statement, something that brings that scientific community together, right? The natural sciences, they've united behind biodiversity and climate change, and chemistry have pioneered forward with health and medication. Then for physics, it's about that final frontier of space and exploration. But what's geology's rallying cry, and what's our purpose? And I think that if we really, as a geoscience community, we explore our purpose and our place, the way forward and the path that we choose then becomes a bit more clear. Now, I'm not going to stand here and pretend that I do have the answers and the perfect solution at all. This is just my view. But for me, it's becoming increasingly clear that we should be pursuing a sustainable Earth stewardship direction, grounded in social justice, actually. So stewardship, let's break that down a bit. Stewardship is a really powerful word. And when you combine it with social justice, it's perhaps the case that could be made that that's exactly the kind of radical purpose that geology, that we as a science need. If we as geologists, or geology as a science, were to explore this purpose, it would mean transitioning away from that more historical narrative of resource extraction and exploitation to something that embodies the responsibility in protecting, planning, and managing Earth's resources in a sustainable way. So I think stewardship actually falls into two camps: resilience and rebalance. Now, when we think about resilience, this kind of future proofing of our planet, as we make our way through this next few decades, this planet is going to go through substantial change. Even if we manage to reduce our carbon emissions and we keep below the 1.5 degree target, this perfect planet of ours is going to go off balance somewhat. Weather events are going to become more frequent and more severe. Sea levels will rise, and there's going to be extended periods of drought. And we need to future-proof our existence on this planet. Now, geologists are going to be front and center of this protection ambition in terms of some of the stuff I've listed on the screen here. Really understanding our planet, understanding what needs to be done in order to protect against erosion management, to find water, to ensure our production of food is efficiently balanced with soil management, to manage and model our climate as it changes, geohazards, etc. So there is this element of geology which is going to be incorporated and sort of sustained by this resilience effort. And secondly, on rebalance. So the world has actually gone through three fundamental energy transitions. So we've had the biomass age, we've had the coal age, and we're very much now in the oil age. But when you look at the total energy demand, the reality is actually somewhat different. So if you zoom in on the coal age, for example, and you look at that graph with coal and the percentage of that, we now use more coal within the oil age than we ever did in the coal age. So we are sort of, the energy demand has increased. So have these been energy transitions, or actually have they just been energy additions? And we need to make sure that in this fourth energy transition that we go through, that we're actually doing something to do with energy demand as well. And we're getting, yes, of course, we're getting new technology and getting smarter, but we need to be challenging that energy demand picture too. When you look at, sorry, next slide. So when you look at the global CO2 emissions within this period of time, CO2 has sort of continued to rise. There's only been 2 points in the last 30 years where CO2 levels have dropped. Number one was 2008, and that was the financial crisis. And currently, just now, in the COVID crisis as well. And that hasn't been as a result of energy efficiency, new technology, or any sort of innovation. That is down to demand decreasing. So sustainable growth is not going to save us. Technology innovation will only take us so far. I actually believe we need to learn to have less. Economic growth is, it's undoubtedly a positive thing, and we've improved living standards to an unimaginable level, right, to those living a century ago. However, continued growth in our industrialized sort of Western, Northern Hemisphere nations is now only bringing marginal improvements to living standards. So the growth, but if you compare that to the growth in emerging regions, it's actually not fast enough to facilitate the kind of advancement required to decarbonize and to actually meet the UN sustainable goals. We live in a really unbalanced world where only 15% of the population have 2/3 of the income, and they use 1/3 of the energy. So if the remaining 85% of the world copy these lifestyles, then there's literally zero hope for a sustainable future. So we need to rebalance. And rebalancing is going to come at a cost. So asking the world's poorest countries to sacrifice economic growth for the sake of containing greenhouse gas emissions, that's not an option. That's not fair, and it's not a world where it will be equal. If you look at most of the UN sustainable goals, they call for faster growth in these countries to improve the quality of life, to ensure that we reduce inequality, and actually that we deliver sufficient means to focus on sustainability. So this means that in a world where we prioritize sustainability, the world's richer nations need to shoulder the bulk of that adjustment. We need to shoulder the bulk of that rebalance. So when you think back on this idea of geology having a narrative of sustainable earth stewardship, we also need to be prepared to shift our skill sets towards focusing on lifting developing nations to close that gap and actually leapfrog onto a sustainable path. So many of these sort of skill sets in terms of trying to bridge that gap and making sure that we take our skill sets to lifting the rebalance efforts of the world. These skill sets are tried and tested methods that geologists that we have in our toolbox. And it's this idea of a reverse tributary. And this is how I describe it. You know, many of us, when we leave university with geology, we have a raft of skill sets that we use. Communication, observation, interpretation, big ability to be able to handle data set and to be able to distill information down that then gets communicated on. And by all means, this is a very well packaged, wonderful output of geology, right? And it's very much valuable and very much needed. But I also make the case that we have to look upriver a bit, because we're seeing ourselves as geologists at the estuary point. And there are some fantastic skill sets that we have that are very transferable as a result of being geologists upriver within the tributaries. And we're a product of all these skills over the years by which we've built up. So, for example, I was a petroleum geologist, and I really wanted to look at what skill sets I had that were able to transfer over into low carbon offshore wind. And for me, the environmental skill set that I had towards shallow subsurface was one that was a good leapfrog for me. So I went upriver and I found that actually I did have transferable skills within the environmental side of my geology makeup that was a very good fit to then transfer myself over into the offshore wind environmental impact assessment, but also the consenting part of it. And so that was the first role that I took within offshore wind, was this environmental role. And then I started to think, how can I go in and do some more commercial stuff? And then the Baltic Sea stuff arrived. So I didn't just leapfrog into this. There was a very sort of strategic journey, I guess, that I went on. And I think that there are many different skill sets that geologists can use and can adapt ourselves into the energy transition. And I'll go through these in some detail. I'll talk to them. So offshore wind, we need geologists and geotechnical people to understand the shallow surface, the shallow soil conditions of where we build these offshore wind farms. We need to understand the fault network, the shallow gas risk, the subsidence risk. So geotechnical and geologists are needed within this. But also when the wind farm is in operation, we want to understand how the wind itself and the air is flowing through the system, much like how, at a larger scale, I guess, much like how fluid is flowing through pore systems. And we use the same skills and the same software systems, albeit applied to different contexts, to actually monitor this. Secondly, carbon capture. This is obvious where the geology skill sets are very transferable. It is essentially exploration for good quality reservoirs that have quality seal above and a good, a stable enough fault system that's not going to lead to leakage of the CO2 that is sequestrated down. And to meet our climate targets and demands, we are really going to have a lot more of carbon capture and storage and effective removal of CO2 from our atmosphere if we are going to be able to reach the targets. Thirdly, environmental. And this is the route that I took into offshore wind, was the environmental route. Making sure that I knew I could handle data sets, I knew I could produce scientific reports, and I thought, well, I will just adapt that to a different context. There's the shallow sediment surveys that needed to be done on offshore wind farms, but there was also the bird monitoring that needed to happen, and the interaction with fishers and the fishing industry and different stakeholders on land. So this environmental role, I knew that as a geologist, I was good at communication. I was good at handling data sets and information and distilling that down into decision-making processes for management. So for me, this environmental role was a way in. It definitely wasn't, my dream job, and I'm fairly open about that. But for me, it was a way to get in and to get my foot in the door within the renewables sector, which enabled me to then go and build on to the next job and the next job. And we can have an open conversation about that in some of the questions you might ask. Fourthly, field development. I see no difference in exploring the world for good quality hydrocarbon resources as opposed to exploring the world for good quality wind resources. And that may seem like an odd statement, but many of the skill sets that we use are so similar. You have to do the above ground political risk, you have to do the conditions that are very technical, water depth, wind resource, distance to shore. Also, where's the market that you're going to sell your electrons to versus where's the market that you're going to sell your hydrocarbon molecules to? This idea of field development and exploration mindset is transferable. And within our company, we see several exploration people coming over into the renewables sector within our company because they have that mindset of exploration and then development. And then finally, data and being able to handle data sets and having that sort of statistical mindset. This is probably the bit that I wasn't as good at. I did a bit of scripting within my work as a reservoir geologist, but I see that we take geologists from the oil and gas side and we apply them to do some of this monitoring on our wind farms to really understand the data, to understand where we can optimize on our systems. And data is a big sort of transferable skill that geologists have as well. So I just wanted to end with this slide here. And I want to say that we now, as geologists, we have the chance to redefine and reimagine our science. We've got the chance to own it and to drive it forward into a future that breaks down many of these boundaries that are actually holding our science back today. You know, I have incredible hope for what geoscience can achieve in the next decade. And I was once told that hope was a terrible strategy, but I absolutely refuse to believe that. You know, for me and for so many folk, hope provides that purpose. It provides that direction, that sort of fire in the stomach sort of stuff that gets you out of bed in the morning. And my hope is that actually geology and geologists, geoscience, finds its place and its purpose. There's no one that knows the earth like geologists do. We know her history, we know her present pains, and we can make a fairly good guess at her likely future. But I would argue the case that with that knowledge comes great responsibility. A responsibility to care and protect our Earth's resources in a sustainable way. For too long, geology has been viewed as a science that is built on this shaky foundation of exploitation and extraction. But our future, I really don't believe, needs to be like this. We have a chance to own and change our narrative. This is my hope. This is, the vision is that we can together reclaim our science and for geology to re-emerge as a science of sustainable Earth stewardship grounded in social justice. And we need to start somewhere. So maybe it starts here today with you and I and having a conversation around that. So I will end there and take any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hannah. It was really a complete overview of how you applied the geology in the renewable sector. We had some questions in the chat. I don't know if you are able to see them, but in any way, I will read that for everyone.
Yeah,
so, okay. So Fernanda asked about CCS. She would like to ask you, what do you think about CCUS? Do you think there is a market for this technology? What are your thoughts about these low carbon technologies?
Yeah, thank you, Fernanda. So I believe in CCUS. I believe that hydrogen, so CCUS comes in as a sort of complementary angle to the blue hydrogen story. Hydrogen is going to need to be a fuel that we use within the energy mix to decarbonize some of the harder to reach parts, heavy transport, aviation, heating, for example. But with blue hydrogen, which comes from natural gas, we split the hydrocarbon and we take the hydrogen out to use as a fuel, and we need to do something with the CO2. And so therefore, we can't just let it go into the atmosphere because that causes the challenge and the problem. So we need to find a way of burying it. So I do believe that CCUS is going to be a big technology in the next decade. It is expensive just now, but we see projects such as Northern Lights that Equinor and I believe Shell are doing together in Norway as sort of pioneering and proving that this will work. I mean, as a technology, actually, the technology for CCUS has been around for about 30 years. So it is tried and tested, but it's always been used for sort of increased oil recovery. You'll either put carbon dioxide down into the well or water to increase the oil recovery. And what we're doing now with CCUS is applying it to a different context. So I absolutely do believe in the technology, and electricity and the production of renewables can take us so far, but we need to think about the combating the CO2 molecules that we produce as well. So it's a technology I definitely see a future for.
Okay, I think that was well answered. Okay, so next question that I'm seeing here in the chat is from Mena. She would like to know how can fresh graduates who are interested in the energy transition be involved or prepared for this shift? Are there any training programs of postgraduate degrees that you would recommend other than the energy transition MOOC offered by FP School? Yeah, FP School offers a kind of it's an online course, really short but really complete one. It gives a good overview. So she is asking about postgraduate or other courses that we can take to do this shift.
Frankly, I don't know the answer to that in terms of courses. That's not something I've looked into. But what I would say, Mina, is that how can fresh graduates who are interested in the transition be prepared for the shift? Be prepared to have multiple different careers in your life. That's how I would describe this. I'm 7 years into my job in Equinor, and already I've had almost like 2 different careers. Hydrocarbon and offshore wind. So I would be prepared to try different things, be prepared to take risk as well. And always take the opportunity. I have seldom said no in my career. I've said yes, and maybe at the time, for a short period, I never thought that it was the right idea, but it's always turned out in hindsight well. So be prepared to have several careers, take risk, and say yes.
Okay, so moving forward, third question from Rachel Lopez from Brazil. Hello, Hannah, great lecture. I am a geology student and I am very interested in the energy transition. I would like to ask you which soft skills a geoscientist must have to work within energy transitions?
Great question. And I have a slide, actually, I didn't show at the end, which, I can, let me just share my screen, actually. It's okay, easier. Yeah. I have a slide here that might help with that somewhat. Can you see? Not yet.
Yeah, I can see now.
Yeah. 7 skills that I think are the geology bedrock that are soft. We understand that the world's constantly changing and evolving in time. We've got this amazing ability to think in sort of a long-term perspective. And we appreciate that history teaches us lessons about the future. We've got an understanding of the fragility of life on Earth. So that is sustainability, right? That's corporate sustainability policy right there. Business also, if you look at the fourth point, businesses look for leaders and employees that understand more than just the day. They think strategy, they think out in time. Geologists, we talk on millions of years time frame. I would make a very strong case that geologists understand time. Fifth point, geologists, this is, I talked about, geologists are skilled at integrating a diverse array of information to make meaningful interpretation. That is a soft skill in itself, in being able to understand what are the precious parts of that information that will help management take a decision and take that way forward. Geologists have an ability to think in 4 dimensions. Geologists are really good communicators. Most of the geologists I've met, I mean, we spend half our time on field trips drawing lots of sketches and communicating in, or at least I did when I was at university, you know, communicating quite abstract concepts that we have to convince others with 3D diagrams. That's communication. And I think with that, you know, the science of geology was founded in 1787, and we've been creative thinkers since then as well. So creativity is something that comes with geology too. So I hope that that's an answer to your question, Rachel.
Yeah, I think so. Okay. Other question. Samia wrote, considering that demand for fossil fuels is still very high, I would like to know if geoscientists can also collaborate in decarbonizing the production and supply chains in oil and gas. If yes, how?
So yes, and I would say that gas is lower carbon than oil. So I would say that that's one way of lower carbon. And the second is the blue hydrogen angle, you know, continuing to explore for hydrocarbon resources, and then being able to do the CCUS. So you create a low carbon or a zero carbon fuel in the blue H2, but it comes from the exploration of oil and gas on the upside side, on the upstream perspective. So yes, I would say the answer to that one.
Yeah, that was clear, the synergy between them. Thank you.
Right.
Okay, next one. Andrew asked, I want to know how such transition can add employability in our already saturated workplaces.
Not sure I understand the question. How such transition? Maybe Andrew can flesh that out and we can come back to that question, because I'm not sure I understand that.
Yeah, he's asking about this transition can help in the employability in our already.
Okay.
I think he's
creating new opportunities for employment. Is that what Andrew means?
Yeah, I think I understand that.
Yeah, well, I think, Andrew, it's a fair point. I think that the transition, you know, there was a report out a couple of weeks ago that many of the technologies that will solve this energy transition crisis or the climate crisis that we have, that apparently they say in this report that 40% of these technologies have not been discovered yet or put into commercialization. So I think in any changing dynamic, you do create opportunities for new technology and new places of employment for people to put their skill sets into. So I think that yes, it will create new types of jobs, but the transition itself as well will relinquish some jobs as not viable in the future too. So I think it will be a fine balance of new job opportunity creation versus some jobs not being viable in the future.
Okay, thank you. The next one, we have plenty of questions today. Next one is from Adri. He says, thank you for the presentation. And the person wants to know, where could I find deeply explanations regarding geothermal energy and our role in that application?
Adri, I don't know anything about geothermal. I'm sorry. So I would ask your lecturers.
Okay, no problem. Next one is from Previna. The person is asking, for a young professional started career in oil and gas, how would you be your advice for a job transition?
So this is a question I get quite a bit, and I think carefully about my answer. I think the answer that I gave previously on taking risk, saying yes, and being prepared to have different careers still applies here. But I always think that it's easier to do a transition from within a company that is doing different things than from stopping and then retraining and starting again. And there may be some situations where that's required. But I believe that if you're able to get a foothold into one of the energy majors or semi-majors that is thinking about their future and trying different technologies, such as Equinor, for example, but there's plenty others, BP, Shell, Harbour Energy here in Scotland. There's many of them now thinking, what is an oil and gas company going to look like in the future? It's easier to make a transition from within a company. And if that's not open to you, I would say as well, look to the oil and gas service providers. They are also now deciding. Schlumberger yesterday came out with an announcement that they're also going to start this new energy part of their business to be able to supply and service the oil and gas sector that is changing. So I would always say, look to the companies that you can see that are trying different things. Try and get a foothold within that door. If it's within oil and gas, that's totally fine. As long as you're inside, then you can find it easier to make the move from within.
Okay, moving ahead. Jean-Jacques Biteau is thank you for your presentation. And he's also asking you, do you imagine professionals starting by wind farms and then go for oil and gas exploration? So the inverse pathway.
No, I don't think so. Yeah. I think that exploration as a whole is on the we're being very concise as companies now where we explore. And to be frank, the exploration activity is decreasing, whereas the wind farm operations are increasing. So the demand mathematics just doesn't really stack up, that you would be on a wind farm and then be transferring into very specific exploration activity. I think the transfer is a lot easier to do one way.
Okay, that's clear. Okay, one more from Oscar Alberto from Bolivia. The person is a former RG student from 2016 class, so from IFP. Do you think that geologists and geoscientists are getting behind on this data fever that is happening on almost all professional careers?
I think there's an element of that, because as I said, it's one of the avenues that our skill set fits into naturally. But I don't think it's as prolific than perhaps in some of the engineering disciplines, maybe. Within reservoir engineering, production engineering. And I say that because geologists come with a broader skill set, in my view, than just that, with the communication aspect, the environmental aspect. I think that there are lots of different types of geologists. There are some geologists that are really into the technical data analysis, and they're the exploration data scientists that we have in the company, for example. And there's not one path that fits all, but I do think that geologists are a diverse bunch of people, perhaps a lot more diverse than some of the more traditional engineering, petroleum disciplines. And so by default, we have a range of options open to us. One of them may be the data science route, but I wouldn't say that data fever is gripping geologists. That's not what I've seen anyway within the company. I talked to a lot of geologists that are considering many different angles for their career. It's just about finding the right one.
Blanca Hurtado did an interesting question here. First, the person thank you for your presentation. The person says, I am 42. I have 15 years of experience in oil and gas industry. I am aware of the challenge faced by industries against the climate change. So now the person is studying a master's degree related to renewable energy in Mexico. Do you think, am I on time to change the route of my experience from oil and gas to more sustainable projects?
Do I think you're on time? Yes.
Yeah.
I think that the time is definitely now. I think that, you know, this transition has definitely picked up this year. People are now really talking about it in a very public perception, whereas maybe even 2-3 years ago it was seen as maybe quite academic. So yes, I would say that you're on time. The very fact that you've taken the sort of initiative to go and be very specialized and retrain shows that you have sort of the ambition to create that new future for you. So best of luck with that, Blanca.
Okay, next one is from Rishihaj. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. The person wants to know the role of geoscience in the age of renewables. I think you have mentioned that, but if you want to answer.
I think I mentioned that in my presentation.
Yeah. Okay, I can move on. So now the next one is a kind of more specific question, I think, from Mena. Do you think if scope 1 and scope 1 and 2 emissions were mitigated during either the Northern Lights or Sleipner projects? And if yes, then how?
Is there a risk that we are too fast to change something?
Was that a question that came from Blanca, or?
Yeah. Okay, Blanca, if you want, you can say it.
Oh, I can answer that one.
Okay.
So scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. Scope 1 is the emissions of CO2 that you create yourself, so from the production of your product or from your project. Scope 2 emission is within the supply chain, CO2, within the supply chain and any of your contractors that work on the project or asset. And then scope 3 is the emissions that come from the use of your product. Now, Equinor has an ambition by 2050, we will be carbon neutral, and including scope 1, 2, and 3. So we will be taking accountability for the whole scope within that. For Northern Lights and Sleipner, I did not work on those projects. But scope 1 and scope 2 emissions within our portfolio, something we're looking into, but it's not something that is zero at the moment. So we are looking actively into how to reduce our scope 1 emissions, so from our own operations, and that is really on target. And then the second part of that piece will be the supply chain piece, the scope 2, and then finally tackling that really hard nut to crack, scope 3. And we have that target by 2050. So the answer is yes, there would be scope 1 and 2 emissions on both projects. And mitigation of them, I don't know the detail of that, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you. Okay, from Patrick now. Patrick is asking if there is a risk that we are going too fast to change from oil and gas to renewable. In that in a few years there will be no enough geoscientists for oil and gas activity.
A great question, Patrick, and my answer is yes. You know, I would say our science is suffering an identity crisis. We need to be better champions of this sustainable Earth stewardship narrative that I talked about, and we see that within the oil and gas companies, that all the geoscientists that are coming through, you know, want to work on renewable projects solely, right? what I would like to see is that universities like Imperial, like yourselves, the places that are renowned for producing good quality geoscientists, are modifying their courses to produce geologists that can do an appraisal well with an exploration, that can do a field development plan, but can also be used in a carbon capture project and a wind farm, shallow subseismic, for example. And that, so you actually have a competence pool of subsurface geologists that are able to be used across. And then you don't have that internal cannibalization of resources, because we're seeing that as oil and gas companies, we are seeing that the geoscientists, a large amount are wanting to work on renewable projects solely. But if you had systems in place by which people could be moved around and back and forth, I think that would combat that.
Yeah, that was clear. We don't have any more questions in the chat.
I think
Yeah,
a lot, so that was good.
yeah, that was very clear. So what I propose now is just we can have a big picture together, just to keep this picture in our recordings. So I encourage everyone here to turn on your camera if you are comfortable to do that, and then you can have a great screenshot here to share afterwards. Okay, I see some people turning them on.
This is the moment where everyone fixes their hair, if they have hair.
Hello, Chocrou. How are you, Chocrou?
Yeah, hi, Mr. Bito. Yeah, that's me.
Tell Mr. Bito, just tell Jean-Jacques, it's enough.
D'accord. Okay, more and more people.
Ah,
okay.
Etienne, how are you?
Okay, I think we are now set to do the screenshot. I will count until 3, and we will have a great smile. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, smile. Once more. 1, 2, 3, smile. Okay, I think that is enough. Okay, I don't know. There is one more question. If you are okay, we have one more question, Hannah. If you want to do the last one, because I think we're running out of the time. We have 1 hour of the webinar.
Last question.
Yeah, last question for sure. So from Andre, the person is a petroleum geologist and in search of PhD position in renewable energy. Is there any room for the person to get a research position in IFP? So, okay.
I think that's a bit specific.
This is for us. Okay.
Some of the lecturers can
That's true. Sorry for that. Maybe you can contact us on LinkedIn. On
The question, just an offer.
Yeah. Okay, maybe you can contact us on LinkedIn. Please feel free to follow us. You can help you with that. Maybe
just to help him, there is a website, there is Careers IFP, and so it's possible for him to research the PhD positions in IFP. There is a website for that. It's IFP Careers, and you can look for the PhD position.
Good point.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Fernanda. Okay, so
You're
now
welcome.
we are set to finish our section. Hannah, I would like to, in the name of the chapter, to thank you again. Thank you very much for your time. It was very enriching, your webinar. We are very grateful for your presence today and for everyone that could join us today. Thank you very much for everyone.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be with you. Thanks.
Thank you, Anna. Have a nice day.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a nice day, everyone. I will just finish here and close the room. Bye-bye.